like I said, I am not necessarily trying to take people down, but I am thinking, like, what is the thing that people would really want to know? And just like trying to be the voice for them who can ask this and give a public answer that everybody can hear.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week I'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves. Laura from Unchained, thank you so much for being on the first episode of Beyond the Beat.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you.
So just to get the ball rolling, congratulations. I know today was 8 years since you started Unchained podcast. Exciting times. I appreciate the interest in talking to me on this, momentous day. And
I know. Well, when you asked me to talk about crypto media, I was like, this is the perfect day. It's a day, when I'll be in a reminiscent mood.
100%. And why don't we start there? Why don't we start with what it was like to, start Unchained 8 years ago, and when you reminisce all these years, all these episodes, all these conversations, what sort of comes to mind?
Wow. Well, probably the first thing for sure is that there was like not that much interest. So, which isn't to say, like, I think, people in the community appreciated it, but the community was so tiny. And so I had actually launched it as one of the Forbes podcasts. Like, they had launched a bunch of podcasts, and hilariously, they had actually launched with an initial set of 12. And when I saw that, I was like, hey, I want to have a podcast. So mine became the quote unquote unlucky 13th, but I think mine is the only one that's still around. And it was, it didn't get enough traction. So they kind of stopped supporting it after that first season, which I forget was either 8 or 12 episodes. And I really wanted to keep doing it. like there was just no question in my head, like, I have to keep doing this. So I was seeking out my own sponsors, and hilariously, because the space was so small at the time, I practically was begging people. Like, that's how it was going. Like, it was not easy. And eventually there was a company that I think had done some websites for some crypto companies and realized, like, oh, there's like a bunch of new, there's like a new industry. There's going to be all these new, people that are going to need new websites. So they agreed to be the sole sponsor for all of 2017. And I don't even think I really made any money, or if I did, it might have been like a really small amount per episode, like $100 or something. And then, 2017 also, of course, was the first really big year for crypto where it kind of became a global phenomenon. And so in early 2018, somebody pointed out to me, they were like, because I think they had a marketing role at Consensus. She was like a volunteer helping me with the podcast. And she was like, this is what all the other crypto podcasts are charging. Like, you have way more downloads than anybody else. Like, you could make a lot of money. And I was like, oh, this pays me more than my full-time job. So, okay. But what was nice is then I had the time to work on my book. So for the next 4 years, I did part at the time of the podcast, the other part on my book. So it I think I tweeted this last year, but like looking back, everything was so organic. Just, I never had ambitions to create a media company that wasn't what I was thinking. I just knew I love, what then was called Bitcoin. It wasn't even called crypto until like 2017, in my opinion. And then, and then I loved podcasts, and, and then from there, it's just everything has been like, oh, okay, now I should do this, or now I should do that. And then, now suddenly here I am, and it's like, oh, I guess I created a media company by accident.
Yeah, I was watching your TED Talk from back in the day, and you could tell that I feel like you wanted to be your own boss, and crypto was that way. But you could definitely feel that total media company might have not been on the cards when you were chatting about it back then.
Right. Yeah.
How's the transition been, actually? Like, because you're first and foremost, well, a journalist, but then podcasting is your usual medium. How has it been to add on all these other components from the writing side of things, for example?
Well, I mean, so, I've been a journalist for somewhere in the ballpark of, I think it's like 26 years, maybe. And I was a print journalist for most of it. So I actually consider myself a writer. I know people associate me with the podcast, but the funny thing is that very early on, I remember one of the reviews on the podcast was like, she sounds like a print journalist trying to do a podcast. And I was like, yeah, that's because that's what I am. So yeah, it's just interesting. I started like with the writing, and then the podcast is really like what I became known for. And then the book is kind of like where I, because writing is my first love, and that's where I, fulfilled that side of me. And so it's only after the book got published that now I've been trying to build out this other part of the operation with more articles and videos and whatnot. But frankly, that part of it has been more like a learning curve of how to hire people. Not gonna lie. I think that I'm really a lot like one of those creatives who, just kind of gets in my own flow state by myself and can kind of do my own thing. And in a way, the reason I had freelanced for so much of my career was that dealing with other people can be a challenge. But, now that I am in this position to hire, I've realized I need to be like pretty discerning about who I bring on. Like I need to make sure they're in it for the long term and that I can really build something. And I literally, it's taken me almost 2 years to like really understand what that means, like on a basic level of like, so this is, these are the kinds of questions I have to ask in the interview. Like this, it's just like all these like little, what's the word? Almost like due diligence type of steps that I wasn't doing before. Cause I was sort of like, oh, you're cool. Your work seems okay. Like, oh, let's work together. Like that kind of thing. And now, yeah, I'm just a lot more careful and discerning. But I feel like it's helping me to grow something that will last longer. And the last thing I'll just say about that is, I definitely can see that, obviously, even though my podcast is much older than many of the other crypto media brands, like it's older, literally, I think, than every single one except CoinDesk. It doesn't bother me that some of the others have gotten bigger faster in their arenas, because I feel comfortable just as the sole owner, like, not getting ahead of my skis, not getting over my skis, and just, okay, slow and steady wins the race kind of attitude. And, I'm just like, all right, we're just going to make sure that every step that we make is a good one and like not try to do too much at once.
Would you say that for people that are sort of start spinning up, whether that's newsletters, podcasts, or even just considering a sort of media company, it's obviously tough in the crypto industry where everything is like very move fast, break things, pick it up, then or just move it broken and just on to the next. Would you say that would that be your best recommendation for people that are also diving in the space? And I suppose tagging onto that, for those early day journalists, whether they're print journalists or people that want to create something more spoken or something like that, would you recommend the idea of sort of niching down and focusing on a specific area of the industry? Or are generalists still something that you're going to constantly be looking for, both in Unchained or from conversations that you're having with other founders or executives at media companies or journalists? The people that are sort of making those decisions.
I think it depends on where you are in your career. When you're earlier, being more of a generalist is very helpful in the sense that, you're looking for opportunities, right? And if you can just be somebody who is kind of good enough in a number of different areas to like be able to grab onto an opportunity. Then from there, you can kind of like specialize. And you've probably heard of that. I think it's like a Dilbert cartoon or something, or like Scott Adams. He has this philosophy that the people who really succeed are people who kind of like master two different things that aren't normally combined. And I think that's what happened with me. It's like journalism and like knowledge of crypto. And back in 2017, those two things weren't often combined. And obviously now it's a different story. But the point is that I think like when you're early in your career, I can think of times when, for instance, like another thing that I would say if you're early in your career is it's actually really, really good if you kind of work more in a like startup-y or smaller organization, because then you will be asked to wear many hats and you will learn a lot of different things. Whereas if you start in a place that has a huge hierarchy, it's not like you can't learn things there. Of course you can learn things there, but at least was the case, which was the case for me. I kind of started that way. And if you're the kind of person where you like to challenge yourself, you might get bored after a year or two. Like, I quit a lot of very good jobs like after a short period, because I'm not the kind of person, if I get bored with something, like I cannot be bothered to do it. Like just for whatever reason, I need that mental challenge. I need to feel like something's interesting to me in order to be motivated to actually do it. And so, I feel like looking back, I can see, so my first job was at this place, newsweek.com. And actually, I did quit that early, but more like because of management type issues. But the thing is that it was a really small team. It was only like, I don't know, maybe 11 people at the most. I forget the exact number, but like small. And I remember that somebody else from my class at college, she was at the magazine. And even though initially I was jealous, like, oh, she's at the magazine and like I'm just the website. And in 1998, it was not cool to be at the website. I can tell you that. Like it was literally like you just take the articles from the magazine and you stick them on the web, and then like you might write like 3 little articles a day. Like the whole publication might write 3 articles a day, and that's it. Later after the experience, I realized like, oh my gosh, I wrote so much more than she did, because she was like this little cog in this huge, amongst all these wheels, and I was like a bigger fish in a small pond, essentially. And again, it allowed me to learn a lot of different things. So yeah, but in order to really succeed, you do have to specialize. So that's why I was saying the advice changes as you go along. But in the beginning, when you're younger, it is helpful. Like if you don't know a lot, if you don't have an area of expertise, then you want to be able to try a bunch of different stuff and also kind of like see what you like as well. Because it's not just about like who will take you or, what job can you get, but also what job do you want? Like what job do you like? And so having something, where it's not so hierarchical can help you figure that out.
That resonates a lot, especially as I've been at the Defiant for like 6 months now, and it's a very small team and very agile. And we all have to wear a lot of hats and jump on different things. And it's a brilliant experience. It's a lot of fun, and it just keeps you on your toes and things. And you get a lot more say, I think, in the direction of things to cover and how the style goes and editorial and stuff like that. So I think that's really exciting. And I'd like to touch back on, because you started out at Newsweek, and then I know you jumped on the Wall Street Journal. You were at the New York Times, Forbes. What sort of things did you learn there that sort of built you into the journalist that you are now? Or what might have been those like initial, maybe even mistakes or things that you did right that you doubled down on as you started building Unchained that were forged in those early years and early experiences?
Oh, wow. That is such a good question. Let's see. Well, interestingly, because this was so long ago, I am at a phase now of my life where I can look back and I can see trends like over a very long period. And hilariously, because like you actually need time to be able to see this, one thing that I realized is I do have a knack for like seeing things early, but it can sometimes take like a decade or more to be validated. So like, the crypto thing, I thankfully panned out earlier rather than, later, but just like, this is such a small example, but hilariously, there was this article in the New York Times Magazine about degrowth or like steady state economics. I literally pitched this exact idea to New York Magazine in 2012. I was like, oh, it's just 12 years too early. So anyway, but the point is, all I'm trying to say is that, another thing is that guy Caleb on Instagram who goes into people's apartments and like gives tours in the apartments. I did that at the New York Times. I created a column called Apartment Envy, and it was the first thing that was like web only, and it was we were doing the first like videos online and the first like, they must not have been the first slideshows, but anyway, but I remember that we met with the newspaper real estate editor and to present, what I'd been doing. And after the end of the meeting, hopefully nobody will figure out who this is because I myself don't remember who it is, but he very pompously declared that he didn't see anything of value for the paper. And now that I've seen how Caleb has like millions of followers, watching his tours, I'm like, I knew that was a thing. I knew I was right about that. But in terms of, what I've learned from all that to till now, wow. It's hard to say because those lessons were so long ago. But I do think part of, what I am remembering that I learned from that is like what I just talked about, the agility of a small team, which I'm now applying more to our operations. But in terms of like the actual journalism that I do, I actually feel like my experience at Forbes, which was more recent, is more useful. My two editors there, Janet Novak and Matt Schifrin, they are amazing. And I really learned so much from them. And when you stay up until, like 1 or 2 a.m. to do a big magazine close, like a cover story, you will learn a lot in those hours as you're falling asleep trying to, make sure that every little fact and detail is correct. But yeah, I guess the lessons there are more about like, the balance between accuracy and readability, or like what you need to really verify something, or, when you're going to write something negative about somebody, like just all the little, ways you have to cross your T's and dot your I's to make sure you are giving them a fair chance to respond and tell their side of the story before you publish. Just all those like little things that just like help make sure that you're giving a good foundation to what you're publishing. So those are like lessons that I distinctly remember from Forbes, but honestly, the other places I worked were so long ago that I can't remember really what I learned from there.
I'm sure they're still around somewhere operating in the background.
Yes. Yeah.
The last point that you made sort of segues perfectly into what I was thinking, which is a sort of fast forward into the interviewing and journalistic style that you have now, which is straight to the point, very hard hitting, much more journalistic, I think, than our industry, which is a little bit, in my view, self-serving. Like the Kyle Davies interview obviously comes to mind immediately, and how you just jumped right into grilling him. And yeah, wondering, did you always have that sort of hard-hitting style? And do you think that we need more of it in the industry? I've always thought that we are a little bit too self-serving, and you can tell in that interview, for example, Kyle is sort of surprised and is sort of expecting a much more rosy painting of him, but yeah, coming out with the facts and straight on him. How do you see that?
Well, let's see. So a couple of things. So when I go to make a podcast, I am really thinking about my audience, like what would they want to know? And I remember for that first question, which went viral on social media, I know people were like, oh, Laura bloodied him and, whatever. But the truth is that when I wrote it, so what happened was, because I was reviewing his like history, right? And I was like, wow, like ever since the collapse, he's had all of these crypto ventures that have failed. And, I had even tweeted like, what should I ask Kyle Davies? And everybody was like universally negative. And I remember wondering like, why does he keep trying to work in crypto when it's so obvious people like can't stand him now? They're like really, and then I thought, well, I should just ask him, like you're having this experience where people clearly don't like you. Like, why are you still trying to work in crypto? And it was an honest question. And I know like it seemed a little bit in your face, but I needed to give the context of like why I'm asking this question. And it is true. He has had like many failures since then, and he keeps trying all these different things. So, honestly, like I know that, it's interesting to hear you call it hard hitting. I do agree it's very direct. But in my opinion, he could have answered the questions in a very different way and the reception would have been very different. So for instance, if he had said, look, I know we screwed up big time with 3AC. We, totally, it went a little bit to our heads. Looking back, I feel like I've really matured and I wouldn't do things the same way. And, everybody's human. We all make mistakes. And I know mine was a huge one that impacted a lot of people, but I just would hope that people would be understanding, like just something a little bit that showed more maturity. But, obviously that's not what happened. It was like a lot of defensiveness throughout the interview. So, I wasn't like intending to quote unquote take him down, but you're right. The questions were very direct. And like I said, I came up with those questions thinking, what does my audience want to know? And, how can I like serve the audience? Like what, if they could ask him things like, what would they ask him or, whatever. I know that I am known for that a little bit. To the point where sometimes when people like support a certain person or the coin or whatever, they get mad about my questions. But then, sometimes like I see people complaining about it. And then literally it's happening the other day where somebody wrote back, you must not watch very many of her interviews because she does this like, that's just her style. So like I said, I am not necessarily trying to take people down, but I am thinking like, what is the thing that people would really want to know? And just like trying to be the voice for them who can ask this and give a public answer that everybody can hear.
I totally agree. And I at least appreciate it. And I do think that people should be aware that that's what they're gonna I don't want to say face because maybe face sounds a little bit too intense, but that's the style of interview that's going to happen. And then, tagging along that, do you think that the media industry in like the crypto media industry is a little bit too self-serving towards, say, builders or founders or this kind of stuff? And there's a sort of lack of that sort of maybe more investigative reporting. I know that that's happening a little bit more, but a bit more of a sort of critical, down-to-earth analysis of whether it's projects, whether it's narratives, whether it's, founders that have gone through one debauched project after the other and not asking them why they continue to be in this industry. How do you see the industry as a whole and like sort of a health check on it?
I think it's mixed. I think that, we do. So first of all, by the way, I do think it's actually really hard to do that kind of thing in a podcast format. I think it's much, much easier to do it in a print format. And I do think that we tend to see more investigative stuff in that format because, first of all, there's just like when you're doing something investigative, you need to have all the facts like just so. And, the Kyle Davies interview, I don't know if it was really, I wouldn't call it investigative, but, I was, taking him to task for certain things. But I do see, especially like some of the business publications, they sometimes do smart analyses. And, like, for instance, so Forbes had written this article about all these zombie chains. And we kind of did a follow-up, and the person who wrote it told me that it had sort of flown under the radar when they had published it, but somehow our mention of it then spawned like this massive response from all these different coin communities that were upset that their chains were being called zombie chains. And so, like weeks later, the writer Stephen Ehrlich texted me, and he was like, these are all the videos that have spawned up where people are mad about Forbes calling us a bunch. And it's like a bunch, but the point is, I think what happens is, so sometimes when you do get that critical analysis, because crypto can be so tribal or religious, like there can be like really strong pushback. And, I just think certain crypto publications, because they're more tied to the industry in that way, like they might be less inclined to do those things that are more critical. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know, even within the crypto media, there's a range, there's like just certain higher quality publications where of course they have no problem doing that because they consider that like their job, or like probably the Defiant, Unchained, like there's a bunch of others, people can figure out who they are. And then there's like others where, they publish things that are not necessarily going to, really push the envelope in that regard. But do I think we could do better? Probably. One reason why I feel like it is hard to do better, frankly, is, and I'm sure you feel this, is so much happens all the time. And investigations take like time. They take resources and time. And so there's probably scams worth investigating, like minimum, every week, if not, 5 a week or however many. And so literally just there aren't enough journalists to do all that. Like the reason like ZachXBT is so kind of well known for what he does is because he's an anon. Like if journalists were to do what ZachXBT does, we would have so many more hoops to jump through in order to be able to publish, and he can kind of do it in this way where he's an anonymous person. But for us to do the exact same thing, it might take like twice as much time, 3 times as much time, like who knows? Because like we probably have like a legal review, there might be like a lot more fact checking. Like who knows? There's just like more elements, you need to give them time to respond, like run fact checking by them. Like, there's just like more things that we would have to do in advance of publishing something like that. I'm not trying to make excuses. Like I do think, the fact of the matter is that yes, we have to also chase eyeballs. And so I'm not going to lie, like sometimes we look at the analytics and it's like, okay, yeah, that did well because it's a positive story. Like people like to like feel good about their coin, So, and that's kind of helps pay the bills, like page views and, attention. So it's like this weird mix where it's like you have this sort of business model that maybe, needs like some of those positive stories to help keep the lights on. Which isn't to say that like you wouldn't use your news judgment. Of course, you can use your news judgment and say like, okay, this is positive news, but it's worth like reporting on. And then you then earn the money there and then use that to fund the longer investigative things. But the other issue, by the way, is that frequently, you could do something investigative and it wouldn't pan out. Like you have a hypothesis, you go when you try to figure it out and you realize like, okay, this doesn't hang together. And then you don't have a product at the end to publish and have advertising against. So anyway, point is, I do think given all of those obstacles, the crypto industry is doing okay. But yes, could we do better? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we can always be doing better, like in anything. But
yeah,
those are some interesting, and I find it interesting the idea of like ZachXBT because he is, I mean, obviously with the caveat that he's doing a lot of on-chain analysis, so that has like a different backing. But I feel like a lot of people rely on him, even if he does go through those filters. And sometimes they rely on him more than they would just say general media or reporting or any sort of investigation like that. And And yeah, it's funny because you can definitely tell, like, even something as small or just sometimes even annoying, like price pieces, that drives an insane amount of traffic. And there's just so much more interesting stuff to cover, but we just want to see their bags pump. And so that's what drives those rival attention of just so much traffic. And you're just sitting there with such an interesting story. It's like, really? You just care that meme coin 123 just flew into the air 500%, and that's all. So yeah, it's a fun industry, but then at the same time, in that sense, it can be a bit frustrating, I suppose, from the journalistic perspective. And as someone that's
but one thing I would say is that that's not just for crypto news outlets. Like pretty much every publication is like that. Like I'm sure, I have a friend who worked at BuzzFeed for, I think, like over a decade. And, I'm sure they were keeping the lights on with their, little whatever, the quizzes and whatnot. But then, he was like going around the world doing these, investigations and like countries abroad. I mean, he had this like amazing job, but, was he the one generating the page views? No, but the quizzes were funding his ability to do these things. So anyway, it's not particular to crypto news. It's like every media outlet's like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that segues nicely into what I wanted to ask you, which is, especially as somebody who has worked in sort of traditional media and crypto media, what do you think that both industries, sectors of the industry, considering it the media industry, can learn from each other?
Well, let's see. So one thing that I feel like we're still trying to do a little bit better is basically recognize that we're going to have a full spectrum in terms of our audience, because crypto is growing. It's very small right now. And there's, yes, of course, crypto natives who follow, what we're writing about or what we're covering. But then there's new people who are interested, who maybe come here and like are totally confused. And so one thing that I do think that the mainstream media does well is write things in lay terms. Like I feel like frequently when I'm editing, I'll be like, can you put this in lay terms? Like even if you have the technical thing, let's have a little explainer that is in just everyday plain language, either before or after, right? And like simple things like that. And I even noticed, like I have gotten this comment multiple times where, people who are sort of new to crypto, they'll say to me, oh, like I met this guy at ETH Denver, and he was like, I listened to your podcast. He's like, I only got in 18 months ago, but at that time, a bunch of people recommended all these different crypto podcasts, but yours is the only one I still listen to. And my takeaway was like, oh, right, because I'm a little bit more conscious, I think, than some of the other ones about making sure that I define terms. And even like somebody in my Twitter DMs just the other day wrote to me being like, oh my God, like, I was interested in crypto for XYZ reason, but I was checking out all these podcasts and I, couldn't really get into them because I couldn't understand them. And like, he was like, I love yours. He's like, I've been listening to it religiously. Like, he just like loved it. So I do think, whatever format you're using, whether it's like video, audio, print, whatever, like, I do see it. Sometimes I see things in the mainstream media where I'm like, oh, I just love how they like explained it in this way where you don't need to know the technical details, but you still grasp it. And even for my book, I remember I had friends who knew nothing about crypto. I tortured them by having them read an early draft of my book. And they said things like, oh, every time you used an analogy, it helped me. And so I put in a ton of analogies. And I think that, yeah, we could take a tip from mainstream publications and do that. And I'm sorry, did you also say vice versa?
Yeah. Wondering what you think that maybe traditional media can learn from us.
Yeah. Probably the main thing that I see in the traditional media that bothers me a little bit is, well, it depends. So there's two things. Sometimes it's like an outright skepticism of what people are building, and like a like almost like a disdainful or yeah, just sort of like a snooty, like, oh, like a dismissive attitude, I guess is what I'm really saying. Whereas, my personal feeling, and maybe this is just, I kind of like really fell in love with Bitcoin back in 2015. Like I always say, it was like my first love in crypto, but like, I don't know. So I feel like if you really take the effort to understand it, how could you not be fascinated by this world-changing thing? Like, to me, it's just like, this is the first time in history that this kind of thing has been possible. And just what it enables around decentralization, like, I still think that is going to be a huge thing in the future. Like, we're obviously already seeing it in such small ways. And I know that there's a lot of hypocritical things happening in the industry where people say like, oh, we're decentralized, and it's totally not. But it doesn't mean that what people are aiming to build can't ever happen, And so what I think that they could do is, not like be gullible, but to like honor when people are saying like, this is my intention, that like they're being sincere, and that like, they're not just trying to grift people or whatever, So it's probably, yeah. And frankly, the other issue is that I do often see that they often talk about decentralized crypto projects as if they're centralized startups. And that really bothers me because, yes, I recognize there's this transition period. It might start centralized, but you at least, like I said, have to give like credence to this notion of like what they're trying to build. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that we get lost in the sort of, I don't know if I hope or just, this sort of ideal that it's meant to be decentralized, and it's meant to be decentralized from day one. And like you say, it's a process, and it's a spectrum. And there's like, I like the idea of like, I've had the Farcaster guys talk about sufficiently decentralized. And I think that's an interesting concept just on face. Whether it is actually sufficiently decentralized, that's another question. But I guess this is a random question that I had, I suppose, that jumped in the ACJR chat a while ago, which was somebody who was thinking about getting into start applying for journalism jobs and sort of media jobs. How important do you think a degree is in whether it's journalism or media or communications, or do we, I don't want to say still, because, but do you still think that we are that sort of more meritocratic place to work where you don't necessarily need to have that sort of backing of some big institution, but you can sort of proof of work your way into it?
I think both paths are viable. I do. So I did go to Columbia's, they call it like their MA, which is the mid-career journalism program. Like the MS is more just like, here's how to become a print journalist, here's how to become broadcast. Whereas in the MA, they do subject-based. So I did science journalism, but there's like politics, business, and culture, I think is the other one. And I personally learned a lot in that. But what I recognize is that I also got very lucky because it was the third year of the program. So they were giving like massive discounts on the tuition because since it was a very new program, it wasn't like, the MS one, which has been around for decades. I did not pay a lot for that education. And I know like typically J school can cost quite a lot of money. So, I managed to learn all those things without incurring a ton of debt. I mean, it was still significant, but like not crazy. So what I don't like is when I hear sometimes people say like, oh, journalism school is stupid or whatever. Yeah, okay, you can learn all the things in journalism school on a job, but then you have to like find the right mentors because you're not going to learn all the things from, just any person. Like I said, I had worked in a number of different publications, and it really wasn't until I got to Forbes where I really felt like, oh, wow, I have these amazing editors who like really pushed me and like who I've really been learning things from. And, I didn't work there until, I don't even know how old I was, I'm like late 30s or I don't even know when. So, if you're going to not go to journalism school, then it's a little bit like luck of the draw in terms of like who you're going to be working from, On the flip side, I like sometimes I meet young people today and I'm like, oh my God, you were so smart. And I know that I was not anywhere near as smart as you when I was that young. But what I would advise younger people today is that if you have like a journalist that you admire, you could either hit them up or before you hit them up, actually, what's even smarter is you study their work and you just like learn from their work. Like, here's something that I did. This is somebody that I admire who I've never met. And it's Laura Hillenbrand, who wrote Seabiscuit and Unbroken. And I just think she is the number one best, narrative nonfiction writer on the planet. And so I studied Seabiscuit. Like, I literally marked it up. And I read parts of it over and over again. Like, how did she do this? How did she get that effect? How did, just absorbing the structure of what she wrote and and I use that for my book. So I know it obviously race horses in the 1940s or 1930s or whatever it was, and crypto are two totally different subjects. But yeah, the techniques that I use, I try to use similar techniques. And you can do that for any type of writing. Frequently you'll see everybody's talking about this article in the New Yorker right now, or everybody's talking about this article in the Atlantic right now. If you find yourself captivated by that, take another couple hours to analyze it. Take a pen and paper and mark it up and be like, how did they do that? I can remember this article by David Gran about, it was this arson case, and I don't want to give away what it was, but the structure of that thing, I still remember. I'm like, wow, I'm just even talking about it now. I feel like I'm going to go back and read that later today and see what else I can pick up, So, Elizabeth Gilbert is another hero of mine, and she talks about this. And obviously she's talking more about creative writing or whatever, but she says, you can have teachers in this world and you don't ever have to meet them. You just have to study what they do. And if you're a crypto journalist or whatever, you can do that, or you can, people are friendly. You can also reach out to them. I would say, you have to be aware of people's time. So, you don't want to not do research and just ask them basic questions. But people will right now, I'm giving you this time because I am interested in talking about these things. So yeah, those are my two pieces of advice.
Brilliant. And I do the same. I discovered this a couple years ago when I was studying Gary Halbert and a few other great copywriters, where they do, I don't remember the technique itself, but it's sit down and actually write out how the person wrote. So you I think it was Gary Halbert who would write out sales letters that he found impressive, and he would actually sit down, pen and paper, and just learn the structure by actually writing it out himself and study connectors and how one line fed into the other and uses of adjectives and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it definitely resonates. And as we're drawing to a close, I want to throw out a last question. It's a double question, but I think that what we're talking about right now feeds perfectly into it, which is, I'd love to know what book you're reading now and what book do you usually recommend? Because I saw that right behind you, you have a long stack of books. I don't know if they're actually books or it's some furniture. Those are the two ending questions I have for you.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to have to answer this in a slightly different way. You might have seen I have a ton of health stuff going on. So my life is crazy right now. Just I'm spending so much time on that and then working whenever I can find a moment. But this week I read Nathaniel Popper's The Trolls of Wall Street. I think I still have a few chapters left, but I'm in the middle of it basically, or toward the end. It's very good. I actually do recommend that. But I was reading that for work. I'm trying to think of a book that I read for fun that was somewhat recent was Circe by Madeline Miller. And for those of you who are writing nerds, like the writing in that is gorgeous. And it's, Greek mythology. It was really, really, really good. Like highly, highly, highly recommend. Trying to think of what else I read recently. Oh, well, because I'm dealing with all this health stuff, I read a book by Megan O'Rourke, and I forget the name of it, but it's about her experience like with Lyme and stuff like that. And if you want to know what I'm going through, you can listen to that, but I listened to it. And there's another one that's very similar to what I went through called The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness. These are both like really, someday I'm sure I'll probably reveal some of what I've been through, but if you want to get a flavor, you can check out those books. It's not fun at all, but they made me feel less alone. So those are the books that I have been consuming recently, just trying to get through to the other side of this thing. So
yeah, I'm sure we will, and I'm sure that we'll all be rooting for you. And
thank you,
Laura. Thank you so much for your time. This has been brilliant and enlightening, and you gave me a lot of food for thought and a lot of laughs. So I appreciate you coming on as guest number 1, and all the best, and congratulations once again on 8 years.
Thanks. I know, I can barely believe it. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.